my love and I took it down. Climbed a mountain and I turned around, and I saw my reflection in the snow-covered hills till the landslide brought it down. Mirror in the sky, what is love?
Hi and welcome, gang. Welcome back. This is part 4 of the trip, which really isn't the story of a trip anymore, is it? It's more of a family getting to grips with a new culture and environment, a new continent. So one thing I wanted to make clear before we go any further, I've never in any way judged my parents for their behaviour or felt any anger or resentment towards what happened in the months I've been describing. Yeah, there was some pretty nasty stuff. There was some fighting and some stuff that really wasn't very nice. But I look back now, I'm 62. They were 40 at the time, and as a child you tend to think that your parents are superhuman, that they've got everything figured out, that they've worked it all out, and there's nothing they can't solve. You just have to trust in them. And of course, as you grow up and you realise that when I was 40 I was full of insecurity, anxiety. My life was a mess. I would never have been able to maintain a relationship at 40. I had a lot of growing up to do. So yes, you know, I understand that Mum had her issues, and Dad didn't help with that. He was remote, he was aloof, he was cold. You know, the thing is, when you're trying to fix a relationship, sometimes shining a light on it can either burn it or begin the repair work. I mentioned part of the reason we went to South Africa was for my parents to try to repair the relationship. As it turned out, it was beyond repair, and being so far away from home and her family just made Mum want to get out of it as quickly and as neatly as she could, I suppose. So let's get that out of the way. What happened in those days, I'm certainly not casting aspersions on my parents. So I mentioned, you know, in the last video, as we were finishing off the work Christmas party, the Standard Bakery had a Christmas party on December the 5th in 1971, which was a Sunday. Now, I'm the last survivor of the accident that took Mum's life. I'm a bit like the last survivor of the Titanic, and I've got to get my story out before I go, and so it can stay out there as a first-hand witness of the events of that day. Now, my brother was a little bit older than, he was about 15 at that stage, and he had better things to do than going to kids' Christmas parties. So he decided to stay home. He was getting into music. He had a lot of friends with guitars and drums, and he was finding his way in getting into the music scene. He always made friends a lot easier than I did. So it was just the three of us, Mum and Dad, myself. It was a hot sunny day in Brakpan, perfect blue sky. And we probably left about midday or 1, I would say, and it was about an hour's drive across to where the event was being staged. As I remember it, it was a bit like a scout hall. There were tables set up at the 3/4 of the hall, and then in the front of the hall was a little stage. There was a Santa Claus arrived, and then they would call out the kids' names, and one by one the kids would go up on the stage and be given a Christmas present from the company via Santa. My name was called out, and up I trooped. I was given it was like a model, a plastic model set for a Model T Ford, a little plastic car with, you know, with glue bits and pieces you'd put together and then paint it. There were some balloons that were on offer as well, you know, helium balloons, and lots of lollies and treats and food and all that sort of thing for the employees. So it must have been about 4 when we decided to leave. The car park was busy, I recall getting out of there. Now, we had borrowed Barry Blumenfeld's wife's car. Gee, that's a mouthful. Barry Blumenfeld's wife's car. An old English car. It actually had no seat belts. Unbelievable, isn't it? But in those days, seat belts were just an option. And we took off from the car park. Traffic was busy. Everybody was going home that afternoon from doing things on a Sunday. And we were driving down, I believe now it was Kempton Park Drive. I only know that because I found a newspaper clipping of the event. The sun was in our eyes, and it was a 2-lane road, traffic going by and by. It was busy. It was dusty, and then I saw to the right, up ahead of us, a car start to change lanes, and it started to cross the centre lane, and it started to come towards us. Now, there was panic and pandemonium in the car. Mum tried to grab the steering wheel from Dad because it was obvious we were going to have a collision. Dad managed to wrestle the wheel off her, and the next minute was like a hypersonic boom, where time stopped. I was in the back seat, and time stopped, where this whirlwind picked up my toys, and my Model T Ford. We were in a tornado, and then whoosh, everything went out of the windscreen, and the back of the car went out of the windscreen, and so did I. So I flew out from that back seat and I landed on the bonnet of the car. Now I blacked out for a moment or so. The next vision I had was Dad coming around, and he lifted me off the bonnet of the car, and he lay me on the side of the road. There was red dust, and the dust was everywhere. It was in your mouth, it was in your eyes, and visions of Dad trying to light that cigarette with the blood coming out of his nose. He had a broken nose, he had a broken ankle. I never saw Mum again. So I lay on that dirt sidewalk or the track. There were thorn trees around us, and traffic was starting to stop, and people were slowing up to have a look. I never saw the other car. They'd blown a tyre apparently. Their tyre blew out. So I'm laying there, and I remember the incredible thirst. I was so thirsty, but no one would give me water because apparently I might have internal injuries. I'd gone through the windscreen a millisecond after it shattered. So really I had no obvious injuries. Out of the dust and out of the sun coming down low, and it's a very red sunset in Africa, out of that dust came a vision in white, like an angel. This woman walked towards me with the sun behind her and a silhouette of gold around her in white. It turned out she was a bride coming back from her wedding, and she was a nurse. So she knelt beside me, and she checked for vital signs, and she told them, no water. Has anyone called an ambulance? I don't know how long I lay there before I was loaded into the ambulance, but as I said, I never saw Mum again. She was killed instantly. Now, in that time she was being loaded onto a gurney and also taken in the ambulance. Someone had the opportunity to steal her wedding rings. Whether they cut her fingers off, and I tend to think they did. They took her wedding rings, but for years these things were the police never seemed to let go of it, because I remember 3 or 4 years later, out of the blue, they rang Dad and said, "We've got a lead. We think we found Roma's wedding rings. They're down in Durban." And then we never heard again from the police, and so I think that's what happened. So I was taken to the hospital. I remember going into the triage unit, and the doctor feeling me and poking and looking for any injuries. I remember him putting his hands down to feel in my shorts or jeans and pulling his hands out because there was broken glass in my underpants. So I was, told that I had a concussion, and I was put in a bed. At that stage, I didn't know Mum was dead, and I don't know what happened to Dad. I think Dad was probably released, sort of, after a patch up for his nose, stopped the bleeding, and I think he had a broken ankle. But I think he left the hospital because you've got to remember my brother Aidan was waiting at home. I've always felt so sorry to sit in this old dark house wondering where are your parents? What am I going to do for dinner tonight? Where are they? They should be home now, and the shadows are getting longer. And then that knock on the door from the police to tell you that you need to come down to the police station with them. It must have been dreadful. But for me, I woke up the next day and I was sat up in bed, and the nurses were very kind to me. They gave me ice cream, and they made a fuss of me, and they shuffled around. This is the thing. I believe that I heard my mum for the last time. I was in that bed. I was conscious because I was eating lunch and talking to nurses as they walked past. And in the hallway, I heard an Australian woman talking, and it was my mum. It was my mum's voice, and it was like she was back home in Australia in the day she used to spend hours on the phone to her girlfriends, Gloria or Jean or Lorraine, and they were just having this chin wag. And I said to the nurse, Mum's out in the hallway, can I go and see her? Oh, no, you better stay here. We'll come and we'll take you to see her soon, they said. They were skirting the issue. They didn't want to tell me that she was dead, that she wasn't there. But that's what I heard, and I'll never forget that. So eventually Dad came, and they collected me. I was probably in hospital for a couple of days. They came and collected me, and we went to Dad's big boss's house. I think a guy called Barney Bonato or something, a Jewish man, and he had this magnificent house in Pretoria with swimming pool, servants, big gardens. He had a tribe of kids, and of course, me and those kids were jumping in and out of the swimming pool and duck diving and playing games in the water, and Dad was there, and Dad came over and he took my hand, and we sat, I remember, we sat on the edge of the pool and we kicked our feet in the water, and he said, I need to tell you about Mum. And I knew then. I said, Mum's dead? And he said, yeah, Mum's gone, but we're going to band together, we're going to go back to Australia, and it'll be okay. We'll look after each other. And some people, when a tragedy like that occurs, they might block it out as if it never happened. For many years, I sort of said to people I didn't remember. It was a bit of a, I just didn't remember. But I always remembered. That seems to be how it was. I never had any psychiatric counselling. I never saw a grief counsellor. It was school holidays, so it wasn't long until I was back at school, and I never made mention of it at school. I just, in fact, I think I preferred to think that Mum had run off with somebody, and rumours started in that small town of Brackpan that she had met another baker and she had run off with the baker. Back in Australia, rumours were that she'd met a Zulu prince and had eloped with this prince, and after driving him home from the African location, the car had rolled and she'd been decapitated. That was a rumour that had come back to Australia. So what I've got here, so before we get on to this, what happened in the days after? Well, firstly, my sister flew out from Australia. My sister got the news, and in those days, to be able to just jump on a flight and make it from Melbourne across to Johannesburg, it would have taken some effort on her part. put everything on suspend and come over to help. So they went to the funeral. I didn't go to the funeral. It wasn't for any particular, I was overwhelmed with grief, or I couldn't stop the feelings of sadness or crying. So nothing like that. It was just, as I remember, I just didn't feel like going. I just felt like I wanted to sleep in a bit longer. And they all left the house and they went off to the Catholic church, where they had a ceremony for Mum and a service for her. And that's when I started to lose any faith in the Catholic Church, or in the church in general. What I wanted the church was to raise her from the dead, not to tell me that we would meet again, that she was in this afterlife waiting for me. That was too namby-pamby. I wanted that woman physically there. So I didn't go to the funeral. I just lay on the bed. I nodded off to sleep. On the same bed we lay, and we watched those thunderstorms come. My sister stayed for a few weeks, and we made preparations to move out of the house. The house was too big for us. It was full of ghosts, and we were going back to live in the hotel again. We were going back to the Park Hotel this time, where Dad could have us fed down in the dining rooms. He could get back to work, and my sister flew back to Australia after about a 3-week stay with us. Now I found this, and I was reading it only last night. This is a letter written from my brother to Nana and Gramp. It's written, there's no date, but it's about, I want to say it's about a month after Mum had died. And I'm going to read it as it's written. I'm not going to skip any bits. So he says, "Dear," but he doesn't address it to Nana and Gramp, but we find out later it is to Nana and Gramp. And why this survived and why I have it, I have absolutely no idea. But that's how history works. You end up with things that you don't know how you got them. And other really important things, they're gone forever. So he says, and he's always had nice handwriting, "At last I get a chance to write again. We started school today, the 12th of January. So what's that? About 5 weeks after the accident? I think Michael goes back on the 7th of February, our cousin. I suppose you have heard about our band. One boy left it. He is now in a better band and getting $200 a month. I had a nice hair cut for school yesterday. I've just come from dinner. Dad has just left it for work. I enjoyed Pauline's stay with us, my sister. I know that now is my time to help Nikki and Dad the most, and I would try my best. I didn't do any work on the holidays, so I haven't any money. 2 of my guitar strings broke, which means I have only 2 left. Not like other guitars, the bass guitar has 4 thick strings. The top one costs $2.50, the second one costs $1.80, and the third $1.30, and the fourth costs 90 cents. I have broken the second and fourth strings. Next week the soccer training starts. I am thinking of joining, but I will need soccer boots, and I don't want to ask Dad for money. I feel so helpless. Now, without my mum, because you know how Mum used to spoil us. And now we are alone. I will stay with Nikki every night while Dad works. I'm looking forward to being back in Australia because I never want to see this place again. Dad said before we come back he would like to see England along the way to Australia. This place might be better for work, but Australia is better for friends, and friends is all that matters to me. I hope I will be able to play the guitar good when I see you next. As you can see by my writing, I don't feel like writing after having a nice long holiday. I don't know if Dad told you, but me and a few of my friends were down in Durban about a week before Christmas. It is 1,000 miles from Brakpan, but we got there in one day by hiking, Coming back, it took 3 days. I came home at 8 a.m. Christmas morning. I would have liked to get home early, but I couldn't get a lift. I must say, it seemed that we walked half the way. I passed the 4th term and was sent up in school. I hope I'm as lucky this year. Anyway, that's it for now. I will write again soon. Love, Aidan, your 15-year-old grandchild. What a letter. But what just struck me last night when I read it, they hitchhiked to Durban a week before Christmas. That's a fortnight after Mum had gone. And you might say, well, a 15-year-old child hitchhiking to Durban, it's not 1,000 miles, I don't think. I think it's about 400 or 500 kilometres. Did it happen, you'd probably say? What parent would allow a 15-year-old? But it did happen, because Dad allowed me at 14 or 15 to hitchhike down to Durban a few years later. So I've no doubt that Aidan did make it to Durban, but that's how quick he got up on his feet, and he put his thumb out and hitchhiked down to Durban. So that's going to be this episode, and from here on, I'm not sure where I'm going to take this video stream, but certainly for the next 1 or 2, we'll be talking about the aftermath. What did we do after that event? Because obviously we didn't get back to Australia straight away. In fact, we stayed on for another 5 years after this event. So what happened in the aftermath of Mum's leaving us? And Mum is still buried in Brackpan Cemetery, and hopefully if I go back this year I might get a chance to visit her grave and reacquaint myself with that day from so long ago. So that's my story. It hasn't been that hard to tell you. The only thing is I've got a croaky throat, but that's not too much to do with emotion, although I must say that that letter is fairly emotional. So thanks for listening, and thanks for sticking around, and I'll catch you on the next chapter of my channel with The Trip. Over and out.